A millionaire CEO dumped his wife under pressure from his elite grandparents. 6 years later, she showed up with triplet boys who look exactly like him. He never expected his past would come knocking, especially not in the form of 3 children who looked like they belonged in his life. He stood frozen in the parking lot, staring at the 3 little boys in front of him, all of them with eyes that mirrored his own, and a sinking feeling in his chest told him this was no coincidence. David Carter, at 38, was the embodiment of success. A millionaire CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the world, he had everything: luxury cars, sprawling estates, business deals that kept him perpetually in the headlines, and a legacy shaped by his powerful grandparents. He was well respected in his industry, admired by his peers, but beneath the polished surface, there was a growing emptiness inside him. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I'm bringing you another story just as interesting and unforgettable as this one. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now let's dive in. This morning was no different from the rest, except for the familiar weight that sat heavy on his chest. His grandparents had called him again, demanding his attendance at another gala. He could almost hear his grandmother's voice in his head, stern, unwavering, "Family is everything, David." But as he gazed at the file on his desk, a final draft of the company's quarterly report, he felt himself slipping further into a life that didn't truly belong to him. The glass of scotch on his desk, untouched, was a symbol of the void that had started consuming him after the divorce. It had been 6 years since he and Nay had parted ways, but sometimes it felt like it had been just yesterday. He still remembered the hollow look in her eyes when she had stood in front of him, her tears reflecting the heartbreak of his decision. The pressure from his grandparents had been too much, their voices too loud, and in that moment, his love for her had crumbled beneath their expectations. He had let her go, and in the process, had let part of himself go too. Yet, no matter how successful he had become, there was always a nagging feeling, an unexplainable ache deep inside him, that he couldn't shake. Nay Jensen had spent the last 6 years rebuilding a life she never imagined for herself. At 35, she had learned to live with the quiet solitude of motherhood. She had never planned on being a single mom, but the pain of the divorce had driven her to grow stronger than she ever thought possible. Raising 3 young boys on her own, she had built a small, yet fulfilling life. Her house, although modest compared to the grandeur of the life she once shared with David, was filled with warmth. The triplets, now 6 years old, were her world, bright-eyed, full of energy, and everything David had never known. They were her greatest source of pride, but also a constant reminder of the man who'd abandoned her. They looked just like him, his features carved into their faces, his eyes gleaming in their innocent smiles. Every time she looked at them, she couldn't escape the sting of betrayal, though she tried to mask it for their sake. This morning, the usual routine began like any other. She helped the boys with their breakfast, reminding them to eat their vegetables, their chatter filling the kitchen. But behind her smiles, there was an undercurrent of tension. Today was the day she would face David again. A friend of hers had informed her that he was back in town, and she had a decision to make. Would she finally tell him about the boys? Would she show him what he had lost? She wasn't sure. But the pain of keeping her family's secret was becoming too much to bear. It was the sound of the doorbell that startled Nay. She wiped her hands on her apron and looked at the clock, still an hour before their afternoon plans. Cautiously, she made her way to the front door, wondering who it could be. When she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. There, standing in the doorway, was David, looking every bit the man she had once loved, though a little older, a little more worn. His posture was rigid, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, those familiar eyes, locked onto hers. "Nay," he said, his voice surprisingly soft, betraying the tension that hung in the air. "It's been a while." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The years stretched between them, a chasm too wide to cross with words alone. And then, Nay took a breath and stepped aside, silently inviting him in. David hesitated for only a moment before stepping into the entryway, his eyes scanning the room. It was smaller than he remembered. simpler. And yet, it was cozy in a way that made him feel small. He had built his empire, but standing here, he felt the weight of what he'd sacrificed. The triplets, who had been playing in the living room, looked up at him in unison. 3 pairs of wide eyes stared back at him, and something in David's chest tightened. They resembled him, every single one of them. The resemblance was uncanny. "Hi," one of them said, his voice soft and tentative. Are you my dad?" David's breath hitched. He glanced at Nay, who had remained silent, standing just behind him. Her face was unreadable, but he could see the faintest tremor in her hands. Yeah," he replied, his voice a little more strained than he intended. "I guess I am." The words felt heavy in his mouth. It was a truth he had been running from for so long, but now it was here, right in front of him. His children, his flesh and blood, were standing before him. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. The air between him and Nay crackled with unresolved tension, with years of pain and regret. But despite everything that had passed between them, there was a part of him that longed to bridge that gap, to make things right. As David and Nay sat down at the kitchen table, the triplets playing in the next room, Nay finally spoke. "They're yours, David," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "These are your sons. I never wanted to keep them from you. But I had no choice." David's eyes widened. The weight of her words hit him harder than any business deal or boardroom meeting ever could. He had abandoned her, but now he realized the depth of what that abandonment had cost him. He had no idea she had been raising his children alone all this time. No idea that he had 3 little boys who were, in every sense, a part of him. "I didn't know," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't know." Nay didn't look at him. She couldn't. But she didn't need to. The raw emotion in his voice was enough. It was enough to know that somewhere beneath the walls he had built, there was regret. And maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something more. The silence stretched between them, thick with the unsaid words and the emotional weight they both carried. But in that silence, something shifted. A door long closed had cracked open. And as David looked at his sons, their faces full of innocent curiosity, he knew his life, his entire world, was about to change. David stared at the 3 little boys, each of them no older than 6, standing in the living room. Their faces, their eyes, were unmistakable. He swallowed hard, his throat tight, as the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together with the weight of an undeniable truth. He hadn't seen them grow up. He hadn't been there to hold them when they cried, to teach them to ride bikes, to see them take their first steps. Yet here they were, standing in front of him, their presence shaking him to his core. The eldest, a boy with curly hair and an inquisitive smile, tilted his head slightly and asked, "Are you my dad?" David's heart lurched. A question so simple, and yet it held all the power to undo everything he'd built over the years. He looked at Nay, standing just behind him, her arms crossed protectively. Her face was hard to read, though her eyes, those soft eyes, betrayed a vulnerability he hadn't seen in years. "Yeah," David said, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "I'm your dad." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, and in that moment, he realized just how much he had missed. How much he had never known. These boys, his sons, were a living, breathing testament to the love he had abandoned. Their faces, their mannerisms, mirrored his own in ways he couldn't ignore. The realization hit him like a freight train, the shock reverberating through every inch of his body. Nay didn't speak. She didn't have to. The silence between them said everything. She was waiting. Waiting for him to say something, anything. Waiting for him to explain why he had never once tried to find out about his children, why he had abandoned her so easily under the pressure of his family's demands. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain, but the words escaped him. All he could do was stand there, staring at the 3 little faces before him, and feel the enormity of the responsibility that had been placed in his lap. He didn't know how to be their father. He didn't know how to fix the gaping wound he had left behind. But one thing was clear: this was no longer just about him and Nay. It was about these children. These innocent lives that had grown up without their father, and now had the chance, maybe just maybe, to get to know him. Nay finally broke the silence, her voice calm but firm. "They're yours, David. I didn't tell you because I didn't know how. I didn't think you'd care, and I didn't want to force this on you. But now, they're old enough to ask questions. And I can't keep lying to them." David closed his eyes, a sharp pang of guilt seizing his chest. The weight of her words settled on him like a stone. He had never thought about the consequences of his decision to walk away from their life, from her. He had never considered how it might affect the children. He had convinced himself that it was easier to move on, to bury the past and forget. But the past had never let go. It was right here, standing before him, in the form of 3 boys who had his eyes, his smile. "I never knew," he whispered, almost to himself. "I never knew." Nay didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the floor. She was done trying to convince him of her pain. She had lived with it long enough to understand that some things couldn't be changed, no matter how much she wished they could. David watched as the triplets played quietly in the corner of the room. They didn't seem to understand the gravity of the situation yet, but their curiosity was palpable. They were starting to ask questions. The eldest, the boy who had greeted him, was now slowly inching closer, as if trying to understand the man who had suddenly appeared in their lives. "What's your name?" the boy asked, his eyes wide. "David," he answered, his voice shaking. Another silence fell over the room, and David felt the weight of it pressing down on him. He had always been able to control situations, manipulate them to his advantage. But here now, with these children, his children, he felt completely powerless. "David," the boy repeated, his lips curving into a smile. "Like me." David's chest tightened, and for a moment, it felt like everything had stopped. The boy's innocent smile, his small hand reaching out to him, was a stark reminder of the love and life he had walked away from. Could he fix this? Could he truly become the father these children deserved, after all this time? Nay turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I know you didn't plan for this, and I didn't want to drag you back into this life. But now they know who you are, and they deserve to know the truth." David nodded, though he had no idea where to begin. He had no answers for her, no way to explain his actions. He could see it in her eyes, the years of pain, the years she had spent alone, raising these children without him. The guilt clawed at him again, sharper than ever. "I'm sorry," he said, the words coming out in a whisper, as if they were barely enough to atone for the years he had missed. He couldn't find anything else to say. He wasn't sure there was anything else that could make up for it. Nay's gaze softened, but only slightly. "I'm not asking for your apology, David. I'm not asking for anything from you. I just need you to be here. For them." David looked at the triplets again. They were playing, their laughter filling the room. They looked so innocent, so unaware of the weight of the situation. They didn't know the history that had brought their parents to this moment. All they knew was that the man in front of them, this stranger who had never been there, was somehow their father. It wasn't much, but it was a start. David took a deep breath, the air feeling heavier with every passing second. He was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown, and he had no idea how to cross it. But looking at his children, his sons, he knew he had to try. "I'll be here," he promised, his voice steadier now. "I'm not going anywhere." Nay didn't respond immediately, but he saw her eyes flicker with something. Hope, maybe. Or maybe it was just exhaustion. Either way, it was a beginning. A fragile beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. As David sat down next to the triplets, who immediately scrambled to sit beside him, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The road ahead was uncertain, and the mistakes of the past would never fully disappear. But for the first time in a long while, David felt something he hadn't felt in years, a glimmer of something real. Something worth fighting for. Have you ever had to confront a part of your past you thought you had buried forever? How did it feel to face those memories? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. David couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so out of place. He was in a house that wasn't his own, surrounded by people he had abandoned, people who looked at him with a mix of curiosity and expectation. It was strange, disorienting, and for the first time in years, he felt the pressure of something much larger than the empire he had built. He didn't know where to start, didn't know how to reconcile the man he had become with the father he had failed to be. The days following his unexpected reunion with Nay and the triplets passed in a haze. He spent most of his time at the office, hiding behind the bustle of meetings and endless reports, trying to focus on anything but what was waiting for him at home. His life was no longer just about numbers or business deals. He couldn't stop thinking about the boys, his sons, who, just a few days ago, had been strangers to him. At night, when the office lights dimmed and the noise of the day faded, he would sit alone in his penthouse, staring out at the city below. The glowing skyline was beautiful, but it felt like a prison. A cold reminder of everything he had chosen over love, over family. He had chosen power, success, and the expectations of his grandparents. But now, all of it seemed hollow. The guilt gnawed at him. How could he have let Nay raise their children alone for 6 years? How could he have ignored the existence of his sons, who had grown up without him? It was easy to tell himself that he'd had no choice, that his grandparents had forced his hand. He had been so young when they pressured him into ending his marriage. They had promised him that the future was more important than personal desires. But the truth was harder to face. He had let them win. He had given up on the woman he loved, and now he had to live with the consequences. Nay, on the other hand, had been doing her best to maintain normalcy. The triplets needed her strength, her calm. She couldn't afford to let them see the emotional turmoil that had taken root in her heart since David's return. She had managed for so long without him, and while part of her wondered what it would be like to have him back in their lives, another part of her feared it would be just another heartbreak. She had come to accept her life. It wasn't the one she had envisioned, but it was hers, and it was good. The triplets were happy, healthy, and loved. She had a small circle of friends, a career she was passionate about, and a sense of peace that came from having built a life independent of David's shadow. But even now, as she watched the boys play, she couldn't deny the small twinge of hope that bloomed every time David showed up. Despite everything, despite the pain, the years of separation, she still cared for him. She always had. The way he had looked at their children, the way he had promised to be there for them, stirred something deep inside her. But the doubts followed close behind. Could she trust him again? Could they really make this work, after everything? It had been 6 years, but the wounds felt fresh. They both had changed, and Nay wasn't sure if they could ever go back to what they once had. David sat in his office one evening, staring at the file on his desk. He had been avoiding Nay and the triplets, partly out of guilt, partly because he didn't know how to start. But he couldn't keep running from it. His heart raced as he picked up the phone, dialed the number he had memorized but had only called once. It rang twice before Nay answered. "Hello." Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a guardedness that hadn't been there the last time they spoke. "Hi, Nay. It's me, David." He swallowed, suddenly unsure of himself. This wasn't just another business call. This was different. This was personal. "I know," she said softly. "I recognize your voice." David closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words. "I wanted to, I was wondering if we could talk. About the boys. About everything." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You mean about them or about us?" He winced. The question felt like a punch to the gut. Of course she wasn't sure. Why would she be? He had left her without a second thought, and now he was asking her to believe that he could make up for the years of absence. He took a deep breath. "Both," he admitted. "I want to make things right." I don't know how, but I want to try. Another silence. Then finally, Nay spoke. Come over tomorrow evening. We'll talk then. But David, don't make promises you can't keep. I'm not going to set myself up for disappointment again. David's heart sank, but he understood. She had every right to be cautious. And maybe, just maybe, that was what he needed. Her caution, her reluctance to trust him. It was a reminder that action spoke louder than words. He had to prove he was willing to be there for them, not just in the grand gestures, but in the small, everyday moments that made up a family. I understand, he said quietly. I'll be there. The next evening, David found himself at the door of Nay's house again. The triplets were in bed, and it was just the two of them, standing at opposite ends of the living room. David felt like an intruder, his presence a reminder of all the things he had failed to do. He had no right to be here, but the burning need to make it right, to somehow find a way to repair the damage he had caused, was overwhelming. Nay motioned for him to sit, and he did, reluctantly. He hadn't expected to feel so small in her presence, but everything about this moment seemed to highlight how much he had lost. So what now? Nay asked, her voice barely a whisper. She was tired, he could tell. The stress of the past few days, of his sudden reappearance, had taken a toll on her. David swallowed hard, searching for the right words. I don't know. But I want to be a part of their lives. I want to be a part of yours, if you'll let me. Her eyes narrowed, and she shook her head. I don't know if you can just walk back in, David. You left us. You abandoned me, and you abandoned them. I don't know if I can forgive that. David clenched his fists, fighting back the urge to defend himself. He couldn't blame her. He couldn't change the past. But maybe, just maybe, he could start anew. I know. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I don't expect it right away. But I'm here now, and I want to make up for the time I've missed. I can't undo the past, but I can be there for them now. For you. Nay's gaze softened, but the skepticism was still there. And what makes you think you can? That you're ready? David leaned forward, his eyes intense. Because I'm not going to walk away this time. No matter how hard it gets. I'm not going anywhere. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken emotions, and for a moment, David wondered if she could hear the sincerity in his voice. He didn't know if he could prove himself to her, to the boys, but he was willing to try. Nay exhaled slowly, a long quiet breath, before speaking again. I want to believe you, David. But it's not just about words. It's about showing up. Every single day. David nodded, the weight of her words settling deep into his chest. I understand. I will. I'll show you. I promise. Do you believe someone can change after walking away for so long? Can forgiveness come if it's earned over time? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The following days felt like an emotional roller coaster for both David and Nay, but this time, they were forced to ride it together. Despite the lingering tension between them, they both knew that something had to change. Neither of them could continue pretending that everything was fine. They couldn't go back to the way things were before, but maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward. David didn't know what he expected when Nay agreed to have him over again, but he didn't expect her to be as composed as she was. When he arrived at her house that evening, she greeted him at the door with a polite smile, but nothing more. The triplets were out with a neighbor, which gave them some space, but it also made everything feel even more intense. With the children gone, it was just him and Nay, two people with so much history between them, yet still so distant. Come in, she said, her voice flat, her face unreadable. You're here, so let's talk. David stepped inside, following her into the living room. It felt colder than it should, the silence hanging thickly in the air. Nay sat down on the couch and motioned for him to sit across from her. He did, taking a seat on the edge of the armchair, his body tense. So what now? She asked again, her eyes searching his face for something, but what he couldn't tell. "We can't just pretend that everything is fine. There's too much history here." David nodded, the words forming on his lips but sticking in his throat. He had told her he would show up. He had told her he would be there for the triplets. But now that he was here, facing the reality of what that meant, he wasn't sure where to begin. "I know I can't just expect everything to change overnight," he said slowly, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "But I want to start somewhere. I want to be there for them, for you. I want to prove that I'm not the man I was when I left." Nay's expression softened just a fraction, but the skepticism never fully left her eyes. "I'm not asking for a miracle, David. I'm not asking for you to erase the past. But you don't get to just waltz back in and pretend like everything's going to be easy. It's going to take time, and I'm not sure if I can trust that you're going to stick around when it gets hard." David swallowed hard. He could feel the weight of her words, the truth behind them. She was right. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. He had destroyed it with one single decision, and now he had to earn it back piece by piece. "I know it's going to be hard," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "I'm not asking you to trust me right away. I'm asking for a chance. A chance to prove that I can be the man you and the boys deserve." Nay looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his, as if trying to see through the facade he had so carefully built over the years. It was clear that she wasn't fully convinced. But the quiet vulnerability in his eyes, something he hadn't shown in years, made her hesitate. "I'm not doing this for you, David," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm doing this for them. For the boys. They deserve better than what you gave them. They deserve to know that you're not just their father by name. They need to see that you're willing to put in the work, to show up every day and prove to them that you're worthy of being their dad." David's chest tightened at the mention of the boys. His heart ached at the thought of the time he had lost, of the moments he would never get back. But it wasn't too late. He could still be the father they needed. He had to be. "I will," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll show them. I'll show you. I don't know how long it will take, but I will be here. Every day." Nay didn't respond immediately. Instead, she leaned back on the couch, her eyes briefly flicking to the window, where the streetlights cast a soft glow on the quiet neighborhood. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence between them. The kind of silence that wasn't comfortable, but not completely hostile either. "I want to believe you, David," Nay said finally, her voice tired but earnest. "I really do. But you've been gone for so long. I've had to carry this weight alone for so many years. It's hard for me to just let you back in. And I'm scared. Scared that you'll leave again when things get tough." David felt a deep pang of guilt. He couldn't blame her for being scared. He had left her, left them, when they needed him most. But he wasn't that man anymore. He couldn't be. "I'm not going anywhere this time, Nay," he said, his voice steady but filled with the conviction he hadn't felt in a long time. "I can't change the past, but I can be here now. I will show you. I'll show them. I'll do whatever it takes." She looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, he saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. It was faint, barely there, but it was enough to make his heart skip a beat. He wasn't sure what would come next. He didn't know how to fix everything. But he knew one thing for certain: he had to try. A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation, and Nay's face instantly brightened. "That's probably the boys," she said, getting up to answer it. David stayed seated, his mind racing. This wasn't just about winning back Nay's trust. It was about being the father his sons needed. They didn't need promises anymore. They needed him to be consistent, to show up, to be present. When Nay returned with the triplets, their faces lit up at the sight of David. They looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and excitement, and David felt a swell of emotion. These children, his children, were the reason he was here. They were the reason he had to prove that he could be the man they deserved. "Hey, Dad," the eldest boy, Eli, said with a shy smile. "Want to play with us?" David's heart ached. He was their father, but he hadn't earned their trust yet. They saw him as a stranger, but they were giving him a chance. And that, in itself, was a start. David got up and walked over to the boys, crouching down to their level. He offered them a tentative smile, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'd love to, Eli." As they ran off to play, David looked at Nay, who was watching them from the doorway. For a moment, their eyes met, and in that quiet gaze, he saw something he hadn't seen before, an opening. A chance for something new. "I'm here, Nay," he said softly. "I'm really here." She didn't answer immediately, but she didn't have to. The soft, relieved smile on her face said everything. "Do you think it's possible for someone to come back from abandoning their family for years? What would it take for you to trust again? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below." The days that followed felt like a fragile balance between old wounds and new beginnings. For David, each moment spent with Nay and the triplets was both a blessing and a reminder of what he had lost. Every time he saw the boys, it was as though he was looking into a mirror, 3 small reflections of himself. But with that reflection came the weight of regret. He had missed 6 years of their lives, and no matter how much he wanted to make up for it, that time would never come back. Nay was still cautious, understandably so. She didn't make it easy for him to slip back into their lives. Her trust had been shattered, and though her actions had softened slightly over the past few days, she was still watching him carefully. She wasn't ready to believe that things had changed, and David knew that he couldn't rush her. This had to be her decision, just as much as it was his. He couldn't expect forgiveness overnight, and even though he wanted to sweep in and make everything right, he understood that healing was slow, often painfully so. One evening, a few days after their last conversation, Nay asked David to come over. It wasn't for a family gathering or anything formal. It was just the two of them, no triplets around to ease the tension, just the two of them sitting in the quiet of her home. He was nervous as he made his way over. He didn't know what this meeting would bring, but he couldn't help but hope that it was a sign that things were shifting. When he arrived, Nay greeted him at the door. There was no smile, no immediate warmth, but there was no hostility either. She let him in without a word, and they walked to the living room together. She motioned for him to sit on the couch across from her, then sat down herself, folding her hands in her lap. "You've been spending a lot of time with the boys," Nay said, her voice soft but not without edge. "I'm glad. They like having you around." David nodded, watching her carefully. There was something in the way she said it, like she was trying to believe it, trying to convince herself that this was all going to work out. "I'm doing my best," David replied. "I want them to know me. I want them to know I'm here. I want to be part of their lives, Nay." She took a deep breath and then met his eyes, her gaze steady. "I know you do. But I need to know, really know, that you're not just doing this because you feel guilty. I need to know that you're in this for the right reasons." David's heart skipped a beat. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had spent so many years focused on what was in front of him, his career, his success, his family's expectations, that he never stopped to think about what he was really missing, what he had left behind. But now, standing before Nay, he couldn't deny that it wasn't just guilt that brought him here. It was the deep, aching realization that he had never stopped loving her. And the triplets, his sons, were the missing pieces of a life he didn't know he wanted until it was almost too late. "I'm here because I want to be here," he said, his voice firm. "Not because I feel guilty, but because I realized how much I've missed. I realized what matters, what's always mattered, and it's them. It's you." Nay's eyes softened slightly, but she didn't immediately respond. She leaned back in her chair, her hands resting on the armrests. "I don't know, David. I don't know if I can trust you again. You left us without a second thought. And for so long, I had to take care of everything by myself. The boys, our lives, everything." David felt the sting of her words, but he didn't retreat. He had no right to run from her pain anymore. I know. And I can't change that. But I can be here now. I can show them, that I'm not the man I was. I can't undo the past, nay. But I can make the future better. I can try. She exhaled deeply, as if carrying the weight of all the years of their silence. I want to believe you. I really do. But I've been doing this alone for so long. The thought of letting you back in, of risking my heart again, it scares me. David nodded, understanding her fear better than he had the words to express. I know it's scary. But I'm not asking you to jump in with both feet. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I'm here to stay. That I won't walk away again. They sat in silence for a long while, the only sound in the room being the quiet hum of the house. David's mind raced, trying to think of what to say next, but words seemed insufficient. He couldn't promise Nay that everything would be perfect. He knew better than that. But he could offer his commitment. He could show her, day by day, that he was willing to fight for this, for them. Finally, Nay spoke again, her voice quiet but resolute. I've spent so many years convincing myself that I didn't need you. That I could do this on my own. And for the most part, I have. But now with you here again, I don't know if I can just shut off all those feelings. All the hurt. I don't know if I can let go of what you took from me. David's chest tightened at the raw honesty in her voice. He didn't know what to say to make it better. He couldn't take back the pain he had caused, the years he had wasted. But what he could do, what he would do, was show up every single day without fail. He could prove to her that he was worth the risk. I'm not asking you to forget the past, David said softly. I know I can't make up for everything. But I'll show you. I'll show you that I can be what you and the boys need. I won't disappear again. Nay's gaze shifted briefly toward the window, as if considering his words. Then she turned back to him, her eyes locking with his. There was a flicker of something, perhaps hope, perhaps skepticism, but it was there, buried beneath the walls she had built so carefully. I'm not ready to forgive you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I'm willing to give you a chance to prove yourself. For them. David's heart swelled with a mix of relief and guilt. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. And sometimes that's all you needed, just a beginning. The triplets arrived back from their playdate shortly after, their small voices filling the house once again. David couldn't help but smile as they rushed in, chattering about their adventures. Eli, the oldest, immediately ran up to him, his eyes wide. Dad, we played soccer today. You should come play with us next time. David's smile grew, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a warmth spread through him. He crouched down to Eli's level, his heart swelling with the realization that this was real, that he was part of something now. Something he would never let go of again. I'd like that, David said softly. I'll be there. Next time. Nay watched from a distance, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. But for the first time, David didn't feel the crushing weight of guilt. There was hope now. Hope for the future. For the family they were still learning to become. Do you think second chances are possible after so much hurt? Can time heal the wounds of abandonment? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance between progress and setbacks, each day bringing its own set of challenges. David knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to make it work. Every moment he spent with the triplets was another step toward reclaiming what he had lost, but it wasn't just about being a father. It was about proving to Nay that he was worthy of her trust again. Nay had allowed him into their lives, but there was still an invisible barrier between them. She was kind, polite, and open when it came to the boys, but when it came to anything deeper, she kept him at arm's length. It wasn't that she didn't want to reconnect. David could see the flickers of something in her eyes when she looked at him, something akin to longing, but the wounds from the past were too deep for either of them to ignore. David spent as much time with the triplets as he could. They welcomed him with open arms, their innocent affection a balm to his aching heart. They were learning to trust him, but it wasn't the same as the bond they shared with Nay. He couldn't force it. He had to earn their trust, too. And it was a slow, sometimes painful process. One Saturday afternoon, after a long week of business meetings and family obligations, David made a decision. He had planned a simple outing for the triplets, just the four of them. Nay had agreed, but only because she trusted him to keep things low-key. She still wasn't ready to join them, still needed space. But David understood. He wasn't asking for anything more than what she could give. The triplets were thrilled when David told them they were going to the zoo. It was one of those rare bright days when the sun shone without a cloud in the sky, and David couldn't help but smile as they hopped into the car, their excitement filling the air. Eli, the oldest, couldn't stop talking about the lions, while the twins, Max and Oliver, excitedly discussed the animals they wanted to see. David drove with a smile on his face, his hands firmly gripping the wheel, his heart full. This was the first real moment he'd shared with his sons, just the three of them, no distractions, no looming past. And in those moments, as they talked and laughed together, he could almost forget how much he had lost. They arrived at the zoo, and David led them through the gates, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and anxiety. The boys ran ahead, eager to see the animals, while David followed at a slower pace, taking it all in. This was the life he had wanted but never fully embraced. The life he could still have, if only he worked hard enough to prove himself. They spent the afternoon in awe of the animals, watching the giraffes stretch their necks to reach the tall trees, marveling at the elephants splashing water on themselves, and laughing as the monkeys swung from branch to branch. But it was the moment they spent in front of the lion exhibit that left the most lasting impact. David stood with Eli, Max, and Oliver as they watched the lion pacing in its enclosure. It was a regal animal, its mane flowing in the wind as it moved with powerful strides. The triplets were mesmerized, their eyes wide with wonder. "Dad," Eli said, tugging at his sleeve, "do you think we'll ever be like the lions?" David smiled, looking down at his son. "What do you mean?" "You know," Eli said, his voice full of the earnestness only a child could have, "do you think we'll be strong like that? And take care of each other?" David's heart clenched. The question wasn't just about lions. It was about family, about the bond they shared. And it was in that moment that David realized how much he wanted to be the father they needed. He wasn't just a stranger to them anymore. He was a part of their world. He could be strong for them, just like the lion. He could take care of them. "I think we already are," David replied softly. "We're a family, Eli. And we take care of each other, just like the lions do." Eli smiled, his face lighting up with a simple, trusting joy. Max and Oliver echoed the sentiment, their voices full of excitement as they ran off to the next exhibit. David watched them go, his chest tightening with emotion. For the first time, he felt like he was where he was meant to be. That night, after the triplets had gone to bed, David found himself standing in the living room, waiting for Nay. The day had been an unexpected success. He had felt a real connection with the boys, and he was beginning to see glimpses of the family he could have again. But he knew this wasn't just about the triplets. It was about Nay too. She had been quiet all evening, watching him from the sidelines, and he knew that their conversation was inevitable. When she finally came downstairs, her hair still slightly damp from her shower, she offered him a polite smile. But her eyes, as always, held a guarded distance. "How was the zoo?" she asked, her tone casual, but David could hear the undercurrent of something deeper. She was watching him, observing him like she always did. "It was great," David said, his voice warm. "The boys had a blast. I think we really bonded today." Nay nodded, sitting down on the couch across from him. She didn't say anything for a long moment, but David could feel her thinking, weighing something in her mind. Finally she spoke, her voice quieter than usual. "I saw you with them today," she said. "You were different, more present. I can see that you're trying. and I don't want to take that for granted. But David, she paused, her eyes flicking to the window before returning to him. You know that just because you're trying doesn't mean everything's fixed. It's going to take time. You've hurt me, and I've spent years building a life without you. I can't just forget that. David swallowed hard. He had known this moment would come, but that didn't make it any easier to face. He could feel his heart tightening at her words. He wasn't asking her to forget. He was asking for a chance, just a chance to show her that he could be the man she needed, the father their sons deserved. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Nay, he said softly, his voice low but steady. I'm asking for the chance to prove that I can be here for you. For the boys. I know it's not going to be easy. I know it's going to take time. But I'm willing to fight for it. Nay looked at him, her face unreadable, and for a long moment, he couldn't tell if she was getting closer or further away. But when she spoke again, her voice was softer. I'm not ready to forgive you yet, she said. But I'm willing to see if you can change. For the boys. David nodded, a mix of relief and uncertainty flooding through him. It wasn't a yes, not yet. But it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like there was hope. Do you think it's possible to build trust again after it's been broken? How long would it take for you to forgive someone who hurt you deeply? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house, sending a shockwave of fear straight to David's chest. His heart raced as he rushed toward the front door, the only thing louder than his footsteps being the pounding of his own pulse. He knew that this moment was coming, but nothing could have prepared him for the brutal reality of it. Nay was standing there, her face pale, eyes filled with a quiet fury he hadn't seen in years. The triplets were upstairs, oblivious to the storm that was now shaking their world. In that moment, David realized just how fragile everything was. One wrong move, one careless word, and everything he had fought for could fall apart. I can't do this anymore, David, Nay said, her voice low but firm. Her breath was shaky, and her hands were clenched at her sides. I trusted you. I let you back in, and now I feel like I've made a huge mistake. David stood frozen for a moment, the weight of her words hitting him like a physical blow. He had known this could happen. He had known it would happen, eventually. But even now, as the reality of it sank in, he couldn't prepare for the depth of pain it would cause. He had come so far, only for it to all unravel in one heated moment. The tension between them had been building for weeks. David had done everything he could to show Nay that he was there for the triplets, that he was committed to being the father they needed. But somewhere, buried beneath the smiles and quiet moments, Nay's distrust had been festering. She hadn't let him fully back in, not in the way he needed her to. And maybe that was his fault, for not giving her enough space to heal, for pushing her too hard. But today, he had crossed a line. It had started with something small, a moment of thoughtlessness on his part. He had made an offhand comment about their future plans with the boys, assuming that Nay would agree with him. But he hadn't taken into account how much had changed, how different they both were now. His words came across as presumptuous, a reminder that he still thought of their relationship as something that could be fixed with effort and time. But for Nay, the wounds were still too raw. She wasn't ready to pretend everything was fine. She wasn't ready to accept the man he had become, not without questioning everything he had done in the past. David had known from the beginning that earning her trust again wouldn't be easy, but he had underestimated the depth of her pain, the pain of raising their children alone, of building a life without him, of enduring years of loneliness and betrayal. He had been too focused on proving himself to her, too caught up in his own guilt, to see that Nay needed more than just promises. She needed consistency. She needed time. And he had failed to give her either. I didn't ask you to take over my life, David, Nay said, her voice trembling with emotion. I didn't ask you to come back in and fix everything. But I did ask you to respect my boundaries. I asked you to listen. And yet, every time you say something like that, it feels like I'm losing control of my own life again. David could see the hurt in her eyes, could hear the raw pain in her voice, and it tore at him. He had thought he was doing the right thing by being present, by showing up for the boys, by trying to create something stable for them. But in his haste to prove himself, he had ignored the one thing Nay needed the most: space. "I'm sorry," David said, his voice breaking as he took a step toward her. "I didn't mean to overstep. I thought I was doing the right thing. I just wanted to be a part of everything. I didn't want to feel like an outsider in their lives." "You are an outsider, David," Nay snapped, the words sharp and painful. She paused, her expression softening as she looked at him, her voice cracking as she continued. "And maybe that's something we'll never be able to fix. You were gone for 6 years. 6 years. And now, I'm supposed to let you walk back and like nothing ever happened." David's throat tightened, the reality of her words sinking in. The guilt flooded him, nearly drowning him. She was right. He had abandoned them, and though he had been doing everything he could to make it right, it wasn't enough. It could never be enough. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said quietly, his eyes searching hers, willing her to understand. "I never wanted to hurt you. I've always loved you, Nay. And I've always loved them. I just didn't know how to come back. I didn't know how to fix the damage I've done." Nay shook her head, her lips trembling. "You don't get it, David. It's not about fixing things. It's about being here. It's about showing up every day, even when it's hard. And I don't know if I can believe that you're going to keep showing up, not when you've already left us once." David felt the weight of her words in his chest. He wanted to say something more, wanted to tell her that he was ready to fight, that he would do anything to prove that he was worthy of their family. But the truth was, he didn't know how. Not yet. He had made so many mistakes, and it was clear that his actions, no matter how well-intentioned, couldn't erase the past. Nay wiped at her eyes, her frustration evident. "I don't know what you want from me, David. I've already given you so much. But you can't just keep coming in and out of our lives, thinking it's going to be okay. You can't just think that love is enough to fix this." David stood there, rooted to the spot, his heart in pieces. The truth of Nay's words settled in the pit of his stomach. He wasn't sure how to fix this. He wasn't sure if it could ever be fixed. But one thing was clear: he couldn't give up. He couldn't walk away again. "I'm not going anywhere," David said quietly, his voice filled with determination. "I'll keep showing up, Nay. I'll do whatever it takes. If you don't want me to be a part of your life, then that's fine. But I'll be here for the boys. I'll be here for them, every day. And if you ever need me to show you that I can be what you need, I'll do it. I'll prove it. But I'm not giving up on this. Not again." Nay looked at him, her eyes full of pain and confusion, but there was a flicker of something else in her gaze. A quiet understanding, perhaps, or maybe a sliver of hope. "I don't know, David," she said softly, her voice strained. "I don't know if I can forgive you for everything. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you completely again." David's heart sank. It wasn't a victory, not by any means. But it wasn't the end, either. There was still a chance. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Nay," he said, his voice steady. "I'm asking for a chance. A chance to show you that I can be what you and the boys need. I'll keep fighting, even if it takes a lifetime." The door slammed behind her as Nay left the room, leaving David standing there, unsure of what came next. The future still felt uncertain. But one thing was certain: he couldn't afford to walk away again. Not now, not ever. Have you ever felt like you've done something that could never be fixed? Can someone truly change after breaking someone's trust? Let us know what you think in the comments below. The silence between them had stretched for days, thick and suffocating. David stood on the edge of a precipice, knowing that one wrong step could send everything plummeting into irreparability. He had tried so hard to prove to Nay that he could be the man she needed, the father the boys deserved. But the cracks in their fragile reconciliation were becoming more visible, and now, standing outside her door, he realized it had come to this. He had to make a choice. Would he continue to fight, even if the odds were stacked against him? Or would he walk away and leave the family he desperately wanted to rebuild? David had never imagined that a moment of reckoning would come like this. Quiet, subtle, and yet, in its own way, louder than any argument or confrontation they had ever had. The past few days had been marked by an unbearable distance between him and Nay. It wasn't that they were at odds in the usual sense. There were no explosive fights, no angry words. But there was something deeper, more insidious, that hung between them, the invisible weight of broken trust. Nay had pulled away, more than ever. She had allowed him into their lives, but only in the smallest ways. They had gone on a few family outings with the boys, shared meals together, but there were no intimate conversations, no moments of warmth that felt truly like old times. Everything felt calculated, strained. David knew it wasn't because Nay didn't care. It was because she was still afraid. Afraid of being hurt again. Afraid of trusting someone who had already proven himself unworthy of that trust. David had tried to respect her boundaries, to give her the space she needed to come to her own conclusions. But the fear of losing her was growing inside him, fear that no matter how hard he fought, she might never be ready to let him back in. It was a Saturday morning when Nay called. Her voice was calm but distant, something that David had grown all too familiar with in the past few weeks. "David, we need to talk," she said. "Can you come over?" He had agreed without hesitation, his stomach already in knots, though he tried not to show it. This wasn't a confrontation. This wasn't a final goodbye. It was a chance. He had to believe that. But as he walked toward her house, his steps slowed. He had no idea what was coming. When he arrived, Nay was sitting in the living room with the triplets, who were playing quietly on the floor. There was a calmness in the air, an odd peace that only made the tension between them more palpable. Nay smiled faintly as she greeted him, but it was polite, reserved. Nothing like the warmth that once existed between them. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice neutral. "Let's sit." David sat down on the couch, unsure of what to expect. The triplets didn't seem to notice the weight of the moment, their laughter filling the room, but David felt it, the shift, the thickening of the air. He glanced at Nay, waiting for her to speak. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her hands resting in her lap. "About us. About everything." David nodded, his heart in his throat. This was it. The moment of truth. "Nay, I know I've messed up," he said, his voice low. "And I'm not asking you to forget everything. I can't change the past. But I swear to you, I'm here now. I'm here for you. For the boys." Nay's eyes flicked to him briefly, then down at the floor. She didn't say anything for a long while, and the silence stretched uncomfortably between them. "David, I know you're trying," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've seen it. I know you want to be here. I see how you are with the boys, how you want to be a part of their lives. But it's not just about trying. It's about consistency. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. And I'm scared. I'm scared that if I let you in fully, you'll leave again." David swallowed hard, the ache in his chest intensifying. "I'm not going anywhere, Nay. I'm not the same man who left. I know I can't prove that in one day, but I'm here. And I will be, no matter what." Nay looked at him then, and for the first time in a long while, David saw something in her eyes, something soft, something fragile, like the first hint of sunlight after a long storm. Hope. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. She needed more. "I know you're here for the boys," Nay said slowly. "But I don't know if I'm ready to give you that second chance, David. I'm not sure if I can trust you with my heart again. Not after everything we've been through." The word stung, but David didn't retreat. He couldn't. This was the moment that would determine everything. "I'm asking for that second chance," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm asking for the opportunity to show you that I'm not the man who walked away. I know I have to earn your trust. And I'll spend every day proving it to you if I have to." Nay's gaze dropped to the floor, her fingers twisting in her lap. The triplets continued to play, blissfully unaware of the storm raging between their parents. David's heart beat faster as the weight of the decision settled between them. He could see it in her face, the struggle, the internal battle she was waging. She wanted to believe him, he could feel it. But there was something holding her back, something deep inside that made her question whether or not she could open herself up to him again. And then, almost as if she was speaking to herself, Nay whispered, "What if I'm wrong? What if I let you back in, and I'm just setting myself up for heartbreak again?" David leaned forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "I don't want to hurt you again. I won't. But I can't prove that to you unless you let me try." It was then that Nay stood up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know if I can, David," she said, her voice cracking. "I don't know if I can go through this again." David stood too, his legs heavy, his mind racing with everything he had left to say. "Nay, please. Don't give up on us. On me. I'm not asking for everything at once. Just a chance to show you that I can be the man you need. The father they need." There was a long pause, and David could feel every inch of tension building between them. His heart was in his throat. He had been waiting for this moment for so long, but now, standing on the edge of it, he wasn't sure how to move forward. And then, Nay did something that surprised him. She took a slow, steady breath and walked toward him. For the first time in weeks, she reached for him, her hand gently resting on his arm. "I'm not ready to forgive you yet," she said softly, looking up at him with tears in her eyes. "But I'm willing to give you a chance. Not because I think everything will be perfect, but because I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see if we can rebuild something. For the boys. For us." David's chest tightened with relief, and for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for them after all. The first time David held the triplets in his arms, it felt like the world had shifted on its axis. Their small hands curled around his fingers, their innocent laughter echoed in his heart, and for the first time in years, the weight he had carried felt lighter. He wasn't sure how long this fragile peace would last, but in that moment, he knew something had changed. Not just between him and Nay, but inside himself. He had fought to earn their trust, to rebuild what had been broken, and now he was beginning to feel like he was finally part of the life he had once abandoned. But this was only the beginning. The days after Nay's tentative agreement to give David another chance felt like a fragile thread stretched between them. Each day, he showed up, present, consistent, patient. With the triplets, he was becoming the father they needed, no longer just a distant figure, but someone they could turn to, laugh with, and rely on. But with Nay, the road was still uneven. She was allowing him into their lives, but with caution, still testing the waters to see if he would stay. They spent quiet afternoons together, small moments that were building something stronger. David would take the boys to the park, or they'd have dinner as a family, though the weight of unspoken things lingered. Nay had said she wasn't ready to forgive him, and David knew that meant the wounds were still fresh. But he also knew that this was the only way forward, by being there, by being patient, and by showing her through actions that he could be the man she needed. It was one afternoon, a few weeks after their heart-to-heart conversation, when David felt the first real shift. He had just returned from work, tired but eager to spend time with the boys. Nay was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. He walked in to find her humming softly as she chopped vegetables, a soft, peaceful smile on her face. For a moment he just stood there watching her, his heart swelling with a sense of gratitude he couldn't quite explain. She turned when she heard him enter, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her eyes. No wall, no distance. Just warmth. It wasn't much, but it was everything. "How was your day?" Nay asked, wiping her hands on a towel and walking over to him. "Busy," David replied, but he couldn't stop smiling. "But I'm glad to be home." They stood there for a moment, a quiet connection between them, and David felt a stirring hope in his chest. It was a small moment, but to him, it felt like everything. "Nay," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "I know we're still figuring things out. I know I've hurt you, and I know it's going to take time. But I just want you to know that I'm here, no matter what. I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to do this alone anymore." She looked at him, her eyes softening. Then slowly, she reached out and placed her hand over his, giving him a simple, gentle squeeze. "I know," she said quietly. "And I'm starting to believe you." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something more, an acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild. It was the first step toward healing. And it was enough. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, the triplets chattered about their day, their laughter filling the room. The sound of their joy, so innocent and full of love, reminded David of everything he had almost lost. And as he watched Nay across the table, her smile softer than it had been in weeks, he knew that they were moving in the right direction. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be quick, but they were taking it one step at a time. Together. The next morning, David woke up early, the sun just beginning to peek over the horizon. He made his way downstairs to find Nay already in the kitchen, a cup of coffee in her hands as she gazed out the window. She looked up when she heard him enter, and for a moment, their eyes met, a quiet shared understanding passing between them. "I've been thinking," Nay said, her voice thoughtful, "about what you said the other night. About not giving up." David stepped forward, his heart pounding slightly. "And I'm not saying it's all going to be perfect, or that I can just forget the past," she said, her voice steady but soft. "But I think we can try. I think I'm ready to try. For us." David's breath caught in his throat. She wasn't saying it was going to be easy, and she wasn't saying it would be quick. But she was willing to try. And for him, that was everything. "I'm ready too," David replied, his voice filled with emotion. "I'll do whatever it takes. For you. For the boys. For us." And in that moment, David knew that he was finally on the right path. They had come a long way, and the road ahead was still uncertain. But as he looked at Nay, the woman he had once betrayed and the woman he now knew he would never take for granted again, he realized that this was the beginning of something new. Later that afternoon, as David and the boys played outside, Nay came to join them. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there watching them with a smile. And for the first time in a long time, David didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Eli ran up to him, his face beaming with excitement. "Dad, look, I can do it. I can ride my bike without training wheels." David watched, his heart swelling with pride as Eli wobbled for a few seconds before gaining his balance, pedaling confidently across the yard. He turned to Nay, who was watching with him, and she caught his gaze. Her smile was small but genuine. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And for David, that was enough. Later that evening, as they all sat around the dinner table again, the triplets' chatter filled the space, and David couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude so deep it almost took his breath away. He had been given a second chance, at love, at family, at redemption. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let go of this family again. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new chapter, one that was filled with hope, forgiveness, and the quiet strength of love that could withstand even the greatest of challenges. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.